Welcome, Bindu Narula, to the Indian Sun. You're on SBS's Insight show, Leaving a Legacy, where you talk about your unique perspective on the lasting impact of leaving a legacy behind, your cultural heritage and so on. Before we delve deeper, tell me a bit more about yourself.
Okay, where do I begin? I guess in terms of me being an Australian, I've lived here for 37 years. I actually left India when I was 8 and I grew up in Europe. And then after I got married, we moved to Australia. And I've got 2 daughters who are adult daughters who both got married last year. And in terms of why I'm writing this story, and why I feel a legacy is important is that in some ways I'm sort of like a second generation or an in-between, because I've known what it's like to grow up, as the other in a Western culture. And so when it came to having my own children, I wanted to blend a lot more of the mainstream culture into their lives. And so I think I did a great job of that. But then I realized that I've actually neglected to tell them a lot about, my life and what it was like as a child in India and all of that. So that's why I have started this whole, process, and it's been going on for 10 years. That's really what I'm doing. And one of the things, not only do I feel it's important to leave this legacy for my children, but I feel that having lived in this country, I would really want others to consider, what they're leaving behind for their families, for the future. Because yes, we're all Australian, and yet we are so unique in what we have to offer, and so it's so rich what we have. And if we blend and merge the two together, how beautiful is that, right? It makes us complete. So I'm hoping that by writing this and hopefully getting it published one day soon, it will resonate for others from the Indian diaspora, and that will encourage them to, reflect on, what am I leaving behind, and also, my children really have not learned much about what my childhood was like. And that's how the writing began, actually. There were 2 components of what I started to write about. One was that I wanted to have beautiful words around, what it was like being in my grandfather's kitchen. And I couldn't get the words. It just wasn't coming. And then unfortunately, I basically had to then start, because I wanted to write about healing from being a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. So that's when I went to these classes that Patty Miller she has these courses that she does run here, which is actually memoir writing or writing true stories. So when I went to her, I thought I was going to be only writing about my healing process through that, which is also a legacy. If I heal from it, I feel I will also help my children. But the beauty of what happened when I went there was that I was able to, write a story about my grandfather's kitchen, and, talk about dancing mustard seeds, and within that embed a story of my trauma, but in a way that, added everything is light and dark, right? So that's what
interesting. I'll come to a lot more of those questions, and we also have to tell the audience who Patty Miller is. But before that, which part of India did you grow up in?
I grew up in I'm from Bangalore originally, but my father worked for the IAS, so we lived in Delhi and in Bangalore, but I was only there for the first 7 years of my life.
Okay. And so he was transferred abroad, and then that's where you grew up, isn't it? And
yes.
I think that it's really interesting, for people in the diaspora. I mean, we always carry that nostalgia. And then we always also have this fervent need to still express that part of our identity. We have, in the course of time, assumed dual identities, but that identity also becomes very important, isn't it? That's really interesting.
Yes.
So you attended Patty Miller's workshop because you initially thought that you wanted to leave a legacy for your children in terms of, sharing your childhood, your roots. But then deep inside, you also carried some trauma, isn't it? Of, as you mentioned, sexual abuse.
Yes.
How hard was it to come out with it? And was it the first time that you sort of expressed yourself publicly? And so tell
Yes,
me
it
the
was.
process. Yeah.
Yes, so it was. One of the things is I didn't remember my memories only came back 23 years ago, so it was that traumatic. And when it came back, I started seeing counselors. And when I started writing, my counselor said to me, "That is the way for you to heal." So, that's basically why I started that process. Oh, I've lost my thread now. What was your question again? Sorry,
Yeah.
Indira.
Generally, how there's this whole process of telling
Oh,
the
yes.
story. And yeah.
Yes. Yes. So basically 23 years ago, it was very hard to tell anyone. I didn't share at all.
Mm.
So when I went to the classes, that was the first time, especially that particular thing that I used that thing about, I think I was asked to write about my grandfather's house, and wham, the memories came back. And it was the first time, and then I spoke it out, which was very, very powerful, scary, but also cathartic.
So in a
Because
sense,
that's how I broke my silence.
yeah. So in a sense, you always carried that scar with you.
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
I did.
So,
Yes.
and then with attending the workshop, now you're in the process of coming out with a book.
Yes.
All right. And so obviously this book is not just it's a combination of many things. And is it a
Yes.
memoir?
It's an interesting question. I would just, it's a true story, and it's about how healing from my trauma and writing about my past, my childhood in India led me to discovering and investigating stories about my ancestors. In fact, what happened was one of the other layer that came into this story is that I realized that I had really not told my children much about my grandfather, for example. I knew nothing about my ancestors. So one day I just absentmindedly said to my daughter, both my daughters, I said, "Oh, my grandfather, he got married 4 times." And they're looking at it in a Western context, saying, "What do you mean he got married 4 times?" And I said, "Oh my goodness, have I not told you?" And my daughter said, "No, and we need to know this. Why haven't you told us?" So then I said, "Well, it hadn't occurred to me to tell you, but basically my grandfather got married 4 times because 2 of the women died in childbirth." So then I realized, my goodness, I need to go back and write about these women and the family. And there was hardly any information whatsoever. But I felt that I needed to retrace and find those stories. So that's basically what happened. So it became a very multi-layered process, and that's why it's taken me 10 years. I've been going at it this.
Yeah. And also somewhere, I was just trying to find this question about, there was some part about you talking about the women in your family.
Yes.
Now, what was that? What was that about? Can you just shed some more?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So going back to my grandparents' era. So they lived in the Western Ghats of Karnataka, and about 100 years ago, they all just fled and moved to Mangalore and then to Bangalore. And what had happened was, when they did that and they moved to the city, my grandfather forbade them to tell the stories of where we'd come from. So basically I had to, and then I only discovered we had an ancestral village back in 2008. And so when I went back there and I started speaking to the people who lived there, I mean, unfortunately, most of them didn't remember my family, my ancestors who'd been living there peacefully for 300 years. So basically to trace that back, I actually had I basically, not only did I find research through history, like what happened to the ancestral village and all of that, but I'm also a meditator and a real lover of the Great Mother. And by just meditating, I was actually taken back through mythical paths and shown the stories of the ancestors, and had taken it back actually way back to 6,000 years of what India looked like pre-patriarchy. And when all those stories came to me, I didn't have any research or evidence, but as I sat with it, I now have research to show what India looked like, how my ancestors lived 6,000 years ago. So that's what's happened. And basically all the stories that were told when patriarchy arrived and then colonization happened, the women just got subjugated, right? In fact, they got erased from my family history. You know, in my family, the minute you get married, you just go to someone else, right? And you're literally taken off the family tree. You're dropped off. So that's what I had. So I had to find out who I am and who my ancestors were, who my bloodline women are. I really needed to go back there and to find answers for myself. And that has really given me a solid understanding of my identity. So it's been quite transformational for me.
That's so interesting. So you did research, meditatively and otherwise, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
That's which is very interesting. And so all that obviously informs your work. And now when you say that you've sort of kind of, found your identity, or
Yes.
or maybe say, let's say, more reassured about your identity, how would you describe it?
Interesting. I am, if you ask me, I'm a woman first and foremost. I am a mother, and I'm so blessed because I belong to two cultures. You know, the culture that I was birthed in and belongs to my ancestors, and I live on this land called Australia. And even though it's stolen, I find that I have a deep connection to the ancestral, the lineage of the original custodians of the land I live on. So that's how I feel today.
Yeah. And so today, what stage of your work are you in? Are you about to publish? Are you about to come out with it?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because I have tried to get it published a few years ago, and unfortunately, and this, as you probably know, is not uncommon. I tried a few publish, and they basically said to me, "Oh, no one's interested in your story. You're not famous." You know, two of them even said to me, "Oh, no one wants to hear stories about childhood sexual abuse." And that was quite painful and hurtful because
that was not the peg of your story, isn't it?
It was at that stage.
Okay.
But currently it basically, so for that reason, I have evolved it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a complete so today it's a complete book. It's a true story, but you wouldn't classify it as a memoir?
No, I wouldn't.
Okay. So it's along the lines of leaving the legacy behind, isn't it?
It is.
And how was your story received by your family and your daughters now that you came out and and told the whole story about your life and so on?
Well, they haven't read my chapters yet.
Okay.
So it'll come as a surprise to them, I feel, when they read it. Some of them, one or two of the chapters they've read already. They know I've been working on it.
Yeah.
And I've been telling them orally stories.
Okay.
But I think it'll be a surprise
when it's and have you found a publisher now?
No, not yet. So I'm actually in the process of finishing off my first draft of this weaving of what I just described. So, weaving in the stories of my ancestors, the bloodline women.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping to get that done by the end of the year. And then I will then look and see what happens. And my attitude today is if I can't find Australian publishers, I will look at self-publishing because that's how important it is to me. Is so important, and I leave this legacy behind.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how important is leaving a legacy behind for you?
Well, obviously
it is important because you've come out with a book, but apart from that, if you can add something more to that.
How important is it? Well, I feel that
also, how do you define a lasting legacy? And what personal, or cultural influences do you think shape your understanding of it?
Right. So with, how important legacy is, other than all that I've said already, I feel that leaving a legacy through a story, a written story, I feel that it really helps not just me, but my wish and my hope is that it helps future generations of my family Not just my daughters, and hopefully when they have children.
Mm.
And it's, because I've done a lot of psychological work on myself too, I feel that you have to know where your ancestors came from, who they were.
Mm.
And until you understand that, you really never know completely who you are.
Yeah.
So for me, that is what legacy is. For me, that's the importance of leaving a legacy in the form of a written, a story.
Yeah, fantastic.
Stories are lovely. They help us connect with each other.
Yes, definitely. We haven't spoken about Patty Miller, whose workshop you went to, and your journey of writing the story finally. So could you just tell us who she is and how did you get into it?
Right. Okay. Patty Miller is probably one of the best teachers in Australia for the memoir or writing true stories. When I first met her, she was working as a teacher in the Australian Writers' Centre in Sydney, but she does go around. In fact, right now she's in London teaching at the Faber Academy. So that's how I got to know her. And what I've really enjoyed about her, the way she teaches, she's so compassionate, and she's so what's the word I'm trying to find? So committed to supporting us as writers, to telling our story, because she feels that, especially she feels the way I do, which is that, we have, what is it? 1 in 3 of us are not born in this country, or whatever it is. And, when we have children, they actually don't know what it looked like and felt like, and what our experiences were in the country of our birth. So she's very, very supportive writing stories, because she feels that.
Okay, so you've gone to and it's so enriching, because there's so many stories the diaspora have, to sort of contribute to this rich multicultural fabric, and is there any message that your book has, and have you found a title as well?
I have found a title. At the moment it says She's Left Footprints.
Okay. All right. And also, have you written before, and how was the process of writing for you?
I've never written before, not in this way. Obviously, in the business world, when I was working, I had written business plans and things. But I write poetry, and I run workshops as well, which are complementary with the experiences I have as a meditator, but also the experiences that I feel are in my DNA about the divine feminine wisdom that comes from our culture, which is the Shakti wisdom. So so that's basically what I
And lastly, one question. You appeared on SBS's show Insight, which is called Leaving a Legacy. You were part of it, and obviously you would have been. I haven't watched the show, so I'm going to ask you this. You would have been amidst participants who also had similar stories to tell, and how important was it for them as well? About this topic called Leaving a Legacy, and what were some of the learnings from participating in that show?
Yes, well, I think one of the wonderful things was learning from other participants how important, especially if they came from another culture, that they were doing the same. There was a younger woman needing to go back and talk about the food that she, her family cooked and all of that. So I thought, oh, that's so similar to me. And then there were others who did extraordinary things. There's a man who plants trees. I shouldn't give away too much, leaving a legacy by planting trees wherever he feels there's trees needed. And a lot of them, there's one particular person who talked about, being a famous sports person of known identity, that she wants to leave the world in a better place than she found it. So that was a very important lesson for me as well, and made me realize that that's what I'm trying to do here too.
Yeah. And I just had one more last question, which just came to mind in the course of our conversation. And because you draw a lot of your memory from childhood, I want to know stuff like when people start writing, how strongly embedded are childhood memories? Because for some people, it's very faint. But I'm assuming that for you, it's vivid. And how does that memory stay vivid for some people?
Right. Well, that's where Patty's classes come in very handy. She takes us through different ways. She teaches us how to use sounds. Say, for example, she might ask us to play a record or a song that we remembered from our childhood. And if you keep listening to it, it's very likely that memories will come back of something that happened in that childhood. So so I don't find myself being unique in this. What I do find wonderful is that she has allowed me. I feel that she brought out the poet within me by giving us those kind of prompts to write the story. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I look forward to
Welcome.
reading your book and give a shout out when it comes out. And I'll definitely be watching your show as well. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much as well. Thank you.